Zach Lavine went off in the first half. Zion Williamson didn't even play, and it still wasn't enough. The Bulls lost their first game of the season in New Orleans, 123-111 to the Pelicans. There's a few things that we should talk about. I saw some things I liked, saw some things I didn't like. So let's get into it. First off, though, I do want to shout out my followers on Twitter. Thank you guys for live tweeting along with me during the game. I do that during every game, just giving my thoughts and kind of what I feel in the heat of the moment of the game, which sometimes good, sometimes bad, but win or lose, I always enjoy talking to other Bulls fans. So thank you guys for tweeting along with me. Make sure to follow at Shy Sports Ross on all the platforms, always giving my thoughts, always yapping as I do. And let's continue to yap. Let's talk about this game. I feel like we should talk about the optimism heading into the game. Zion was announced with an illness, so he did not play. I think a lot of Bulls fans saw that news come down and feel like, all right, man, we have a chance in this game. It was also Lonzo Ball's first game back in New Orleans as a member of the Chicago Bulls. If you guys remember his first season as a Bull, the home opener was against the Pelicans, but the Bulls didn't play in New Orleans until later in the season after Lonzo had already had his injury. Some optimism, just feeling kind of good vibes from the preseason. The Bulls played well in the preseason. I'd say the beginning of the game was a little bit of a mixed bag, kind of went back and forth. I noted that we were just about 5 minutes into the game and Stacey King was already getting really frustrated that Bulls players were not feeding Nikola Vucevic down low. There were some missed opportunities. He had mismatches. We know Stacey King has been very vocal about this in the past, feeding the big guy. It's a simple game, and it seemed like the Bulls were missing him on a lot of those plays. Lonzo was the first player off the bench in a regular season game for the Chicago Bulls, which I think is just awesome. Like, if you put the fact that he's a good player aside, just the fact that he's playing basketball at all right now is in some ways a miracle. A lot of people thought he would never play basketball again. But then you add in the fact that he's also playing really well. So he hit a three-pointer. He was getting involved defensively. Obviously, he can't play a ton of minutes right now. He's still on a minutes restriction. But the fact that he is the first player off the bench for the Bulls right now tells me that if Lonzo continues to play well and respond well to the minutes that he's getting, and he can ramp those minutes up, his body is responding well. Hey, man, I'm just saying, he might be the starter. And I feel like that's another thing worth pointing out because Josh Giddey did struggle in this game. Something that kind of stood out too is that the Pelicans fans were booing Josh Giddey every time he touched the ball. And it did seem to kind of affect the team. It seemed like they kind of let that get in their heads a little bit. There were a lot of moments where the crowd got really into the game and it felt like that was affecting the Bulls' focus. The hot start for Zach Lavine was a really encouraging sign. Zach was 5 for 6 from 3 in the first half for 19 points. So by halftime, it felt like we're in this game. Zach might be in takeover mode, but right before halftime, the Bulls had a little bit of a collapse, one of their classic pre-halftime collapses, and it was specifically fueled by their turnovers. The Bulls turned the ball over 21 times in this game. Zach had 7 of those turnovers. So even though he was shooting the ball well and he was scoring well, the Bulls offense was out of sorts. That kind of lends itself to the point I was just making about Giddey, who is supposed to be this guy that they brought in for playmaking. He's supposed to be, a pass-first point guard, but the Bulls are turning the ball over 21 times. This is a guard-heavy team. We know that. This is an extremely guard-heavy team, and it's kind of ridiculous that turnovers continue to be one of their biggest weaknesses when, by all accounts, they should be one of the better passing teams in the NBA. So those turnovers turned into 30 points for the Pelicans. It was just a lack of control, mental mistakes. Guys who are usually good with the ball, Ayo Dosunmu, Kobe White, they were making some mistakes, and those mistakes turn into defensive mistakes, right? Because if you're giving them so many easy opportunities to take the ball away, you're also making it harder for your defense to recover and get back and defend in transition. When it came down to winning time, Brandon Ingram took over. He stepped up. He had 33 points at the end of this game, a clutch turnaround jumper in the fourth quarter. They ended up with a 16-point lead at one point, and at the end of the game, the Pelicans go on a 13-2 run. Ingram contributed 8 points to that run, and that was too much for the Bulls. They weren't able to make the comeback, and that pretty much sealed the game. Some takeaways here. Let's talk about some of the things that I saw that I liked and didn't like. First off, Buzelis came into the game in the first half. He only played a few minutes, and he was put on Brandon Ingram immediately, which was a very difficult assignment. Didn't look great, I'll be honest. Modest looked shaky. His first NBA regular season game, though, playing very few minutes, and it felt like the rotations were just kind of a little bit out of sync. And it's the first game. Billy Donovan's going to work these things out. But it really does come back to that question of what the goal is for this season. Is it to develop the young talent or is it to contend? Because if you're putting Modest Buzelis in only for a few minutes and you're benching him if he doesn't look good, then on the flip side of that, why aren't you playing guys like Torrey Craig, who are veterans who might be able to help with some of these shooting and turnover problems, defensive problems? I thought that was a little bit interesting. Talen Horton-Tucker played over Torrey Craig. Again, guard-heavy team. I just thought it was a little bit interesting, questionable decision-making, from a lineup perspective. And then when you talk about the starting lineup specifically with Josh Giddey and Coby White and Zach Lavine, I think they've done Coby White a disservice again. I feel like Coby White has once again been put in a position where he has to figure out what his role is going to be. Is he going to be handling the ball and distributing? Is he going to be an off-ball shooter? When is the right time to go back and forth between the two? I'm losing faith in the continuity of these lineups. It's frustrating because I thought Coby White played his best ball last season when he was the primary ball handler, had the ball in his hands, but Josh Giddey is not an off-ball player. So you've kind of put yourself in this situation where you have to put the ball in Giddey's hands. We'll see what ends up happening with the rotations. I personally think that the goal at this point should be to get Coby White maybe running the second unit, kind of like how they used to stagger DeRozan and Lavine and kind of let DeRozan run the second unit and Lavine run the first unit, or vice versa. But I will say, isn't this kind of what we expected the Bulls to do this season? A lot of us in the offseason were saying, the best case scenario this year is you develop the young talent, you look good in some games, Zach Lavine, looking good, shooting the ball well, upping that trade value, but ultimately still losing the game with the greater goal of being in the draft lottery and getting a chance at one of the top picks in next year's draft. If you look at this game through that lens, huge success. But there are still really big question marks. Patrick Williams was struggling in this game, coming off a big extension from the Bulls. Javonte Green plays for the New Orleans Pelicans now. And guess who was going off in the fourth quarter doing his Javonte Green thing? Yes, there were 5 Javontes out there and they weren't out there for the Bulls. They were out there for the Pelicans. And it does kind of call into question, why didn't the Bulls take a look at re-signing him after he came back from that injury last season and looked really good? He has experience playing with a bunch of guys on this roster. The chemistry is there, and they decided not to bring him back. I know that they needed to go out and sign a backup center with Andre Drummond leaving the team, but I feel like there are ways. NBA teams find ways to keep guys that they want to keep. Javonte Green, love the guy, no offense intended. He's not getting a max contract. He's not getting big money. They could have found the money. They could have re-signed Javonte Green, and he played a critical role for the Bulls over the course of 3 seasons at this point. And I felt like that was kind of emblematic of the Bulls in general, of you have this very underrated player who the Bulls managed to overlook, who's now kicking your ass in the fourth quarter and showing you why you should have kept him. And he had one of those huge highlight dunks. I tweeted that Pelicans fans had their Javonte Green saved my life moment. We all know those moments where Javonte would make a huge play and we're just like, holy shit, this guy's amazing. And now he's not doing it for us, and it hurts. So there's a lot to be figured out with the Bulls rotation. And I think in a lot of ways, kind of what most people were expecting out of the team this season. Up and down, inconsistent performances, some good, some bad. But what I really want to see going forward, I'd like to see Coby White more involved. I'd like to see Coby White handling the ball more. But let's not belabor it. First game is in the books. Bulls looked good and bad. A lot of kind of what we were expecting. A lot of the same from last season, honestly. Turnovers, poor shooting from 3-point range, poor defense. It's the Chicago Bulls. What do you want? That's the team. That's who they are. That's who they've been. And I think that's who they will continue to be. Next game is against the Milwaukee Bucks. So it's getting easier, right, guys? We'll play the Bucks on Friday, and I will be back here to recap. So thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to follow again at Shy Sports Ross on all the platforms. I think I'm going to start doing these maybe as weekly or bi-weekly videos / podcasts where I could recap a couple games instead of trying to keep up with every game. It gets a little difficult trying to do every single game. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy these videos, let me know if you prefer to see a 2 times a week or a once weekly show that has a lot versus the post-game recaps. So thank you guys again for watching, and we will talk again very soon.